Welcome back to Drunk on Writing and another episode of the Stephen King dissection series, brought to you in part through the patronage of Ariya Norinth. Today, we're discussing Stephen King's lucky number 13 novel, Christine, released April 29th, 1983, just a little over 7 months before its adaptation, directed by John Carpenter, and which we'll go more in depth on next time, made its theatrical debut. The premise of this one was relatively simple. What if a car were alive? An evil car at that. That's probably pretty important. And I've got to tell you, I was pretty excited to read this and to watch the film. I remember growing up, my father always had something of a soft spot for Christine. The movie version, at least, he's not much of a reader of fiction. I mean, so much so that he made a model of Christine that I have up on my shelf over here. So I always kind of held it in something of a high regard. I knew it was a cult classic at the very least. And I recently got even more excited about it because someone commented on one of the videos asking me when I would get to Christine because it was his or her favorite book written by Stephen King. So I was a little bit pumped. I came into this really with, I don't want to say high expectations, but some expectations. And now I've got to say I wish I hadn't, because I'm rather let down, because this book it really is far from King's best. That's to put it mildly. But before we get into all that, I just want to remind you that if you want more episodes more often, please be sure to head on over to drunkonwriting.com. And if you are watching this early, way earlier than everyone else, that means you are a patron, and I want to say thank you. And if I mess anything up, please let me know way ahead of everyone else so I don't look like an idiot once the public gets to see this. That would be very great. Now, Christine, the novel. It's a rather complex novel, I'll give it that. There's a lot of moving parts, literally, I suppose, and a whole lot of metaphorical layers, whether intentional or not. I say that because, unfortunately, Christine is another one of those novels that we really don't have a lot of back history for. In fact, over at StephenKing.com, the way King lays out his inspiration for this novel, well, it's really not all that inspiring. One night, he writes, as I was turning into my driveway, I saw the odometer numbers on my car turn from 9999.9 to 10,000. I found myself wondering if there might not be a story in an odometer that ran backward. The car, I thought, would get younger instead of older, finally collapsing into its component parts. The next day I started writing it. I thought it would be a funny short story, a kind of American graffiti. Instead, a fairly long novel came out, a supernatural tale about girlfriends, boyfriends, and Christine. A fairly long and bloated novel, I'd say, one that takes far too long to get going, reuses a lot of what we'd already seen in previous novels and short stories. Remember Trucks, aka Maximum Overdrive? Yeah. And at times is, unfortunately, just poorly written. And I think a lot of that stems from the time in which this book was written. If you recall when we talked about Cujo, which, again, Stephen King does not remember writing. At this point in his life, Stephen King was involved in a lot of cocaine use, a lot of binge drinking. He only spent a couple of hours each day sober. So he was in a lot of stuff. And plus, he was at the top of his world. I mean, he was at the top of the bestseller list. Everything that he wrote, everything that he touched was being eyed on for a film adaptation, including this one. I mean, the rights to Christine, the film rights for Christine, were sold before the book even published. Though, I gotta say, it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Especially when you've got something as beautiful, as provocative as Christine, a 1958 Plymouth Fury, as the book's dust jacket expounds, white over red two-tone survivor of a time when high-test gasoline was priced at $0.25 a gallon and speedometers were calibrated all the way up to 120 miles an hour. A time when rock and roll in all its first crude power ruled America. A time when speed was king. And even if King originally focused the story on a Fury because, as he wrote, They were the most mundane 50s car that I could remember. I didn't want a car that already had a legend attached to it. More than a dog, a prom queen, or even a jailbreak, centering a film, centering a book on a car like Christine just feels, it just feels natural. Though I would say that I think a more appropriate title for the book would be L'Abbé, after Christine's owner, who is described as if a cold November wind could think. I like that. I like that description rather a bit, though. Perhaps it would be a little odd naming a book after a curmudgeonly old soul with a back brace that yells shitter at everyone that he happens to come across. Though, I mean, he is the reason that everything happens in this book, isn't he? That's one of the questions with which the movie people started to wrestle. King admitted in a 1983 interview after the book's release but before the films. Was it L'Abbé or was it the car? I understand that their answer is that it was the car. Spoilers. I think that in the book, there is the suggestion that it's probably L'Abbé rather than the car. I feel like, even at that time, he honestly did not know what he had written, what the flow of thought was. Though, obviously, the book really builds on concepts that he had cemented in his previous works, probably most notably within Salem's Lot and The Shining, that evil leaves this lasting mark. And L'Abbé, I mean, he either seems to use his dying daughter, who is choking on a piece of meat that she's eating at some fast food restaurant. He uses her to either imbue Christine with a spirit, he places her dying body in there and doesn't try to save her, just puts her in Christine so she dies within Christine, or offers her up as something of a sacrifice to the car. So, yeah, I mean, it's left rather vague, and none of it really truly helps explain why Christine is in such foul shape when we first come across her within the novel. The left side of her windshield was a snarled spiderweb of cracks, we find out right in that opening chapter. The right rear deck was bashed in, and an ugly nest of rust had grown in the paint-scraped valley. The back bumper was askew, the trunk lid was ajar, and upholstery was bleeding out through several long tears in the seat covers, both front and back. I really don't understand why it's fallen into such disrepair, other than perhaps trying to, in some way, reflect L'Abbé's sour disposition. I mean, the guy is he's just not a nice dude. I mean, he's very, very devilish in a lot of ways. Side note, the final line of the epilogue, the final line of the book, tying the Plymouth Fury to L'Abbé's anger, brilliant. But back to what I was saying, I mean, it's not like Christine's condition really matters all that much, because our main man there, Arnie, described by King as a loser, a natural out, and, most unfortunately, Pimple City, he falls for her. We're literally told this. I'm not just saying that. I'm not just going off of any sort of implications. He was gone, King wrote, lock, stock, and barrel. Arnie had fallen in love. It's subtle, really, in this writing. So subtle that I barely really understood what was happening. Just like in this sentence, I just could not fathom what King was trying to imply here. The poets continually and sometimes willfully mistake love. Love is the old slaughterer. Love is not blind. Love is a cannibal with extremely acute vision. Love is insectile. It is always hungry. So subtle, this imagery. Thank you, Stephen King, for giving us just such enlightening commentary each and every page of this novel. I think if you didn't spell it out like this way, I just would have missed your point entirely. I really do think that would have happened. Yeah, I'm a little salty about this novel, just compared to the mastery of foreshadowing and just plot development that we've seen in previous novels. And there is some in this novel, don't get me wrong. Here's a good example. I was 17 years old, bound for college in another year, and I didn't believe in such things as curses and emotions that linger and grow rancid, the spilled milk of dreams. I would not have granted you the power of the past to reach out horrid death hands toward the living. But I'm a little older now. So yes, there is a semblance of the great, powerful writer that is Stephen King within the pages of this novel, if you happen to dig through the coked-out prattling that is the majority of it. And unfortunately, it is really overshadowed by the fact that we're told everything. everything except for like the plan minutia, which is left out for, suspense purposes. I always hated when authors do that. J.K. Rowling, notorious for doing that, but let's not talk about her. She sucks. And some of what we are given doesn't even jive from one page to the next. There's no really strong sense of consistency between chapters, between pages, between almost paragraphs at times. The most egregious aspect of this book, I think, is, again, how we are told time and time again that Arnie's obsession with Christine, which starts right here, very first chapter, right from the very first page, before we've even met him, love at first sight, that it changes him, right? First, by clearing up his complexion. That's great. That's fantastic. Let's all go get Christine's. And it also helps him get a girl, Lee, who is literally described as perfect. Lee Cabot was just beautiful, with no qualifications. Her skin was fair and perfect, usually with a touch of perfectly natural color. She stood about 5'8", tall for a girl, but not too tall. And her figure was lovely, firm, high breasts, a small waist that looked as if you could almost put your hands around it. Anyway, you longed to try. She's also basically Sue Norton from Salem's Lot, or Sue Snell from Carrie, or pretty much any other of Stephen King's female characters from his earlier books, in that they're these near flawless caricatures of a person that are written for you specifically to fall in love with, or here to potentially eventually mourn. Specifically when Arnie nearly lets her choke to death on a hamburger. Interesting, they were both meat. It was meat both times. That's weird. I didn't really think about that. I wonder what... Does she have some kind of... Is that like a demonic thing that she can control meat in your throat? Huh. But then, Christine also helps Arnie get the gusto to lash out at his parents, takes time away from his family and his friends, and makes him just completely sort of lose interest in school. He even says that he won't go to a college that won't let him take her there. A college that won't allow him a car. This damn car is just ruining his life. But wait, is this not just part of growing up, just becoming a teenager? Is this not what sort of we all go through at this time in our life? I seem to remember going through something very similar at the time. I mean, Death Car excluded, of course, but I mean, we even get this great speech from Arnie against his parents in the very aptly titled chapter, The First Argument. You wanted me in the college courses? I'm there, Arnie says. You wanted me in the chess club instead of the school band? Okay, I'm there too. I managed to get through 17 years without embarrassing you in front of the bridge club or landing in jail. I'm telling you, I'm going to have this one thing. And he does eventually. And from the moment Arnie buys Christine, his family, his friends, including the narrator Dennis, the partial narrator Dennis, attribute his changing attitude, his changing outward appearance to some sort of effect that the car has on him. Why would you not think it's the other way around? After all, he just argued with his parents before buying the car. Cause and effect, everyone. I mean, it's simple as that. I mean, you don't see a 40-year-old midlife crisis driving a Corvette down the street and you go, man, that car has really changed him. No, you know that 40-year-old bought the car because he's compensating for something. Maybe something a little smaller, maybe, just a course in life that he never took. And a teenager buying a car, why is that so damning? Why is that so surprising? Why is everybody like, oh my God, I can't believe you do this? Especially given the prominence that is placed within the book, by the family, by the friends, on Arnie's ability to repair cars. He's in the automobile shops, he knows about this sort of stuff. I would encourage this. Like, if my son came over and he said, I'm going to buy this car, I want to work on it, it's a project, I want to fix it up, cool, sure, why not? Park it in the garage, at least I know where you are, at least I know what you're doing. That's a nice little project, that's a cool thing for you to be doing. Get some real life skills there. And maybe, sure, Arnie paid probably a little too much for this junker, but that's surely a life lesson. I mean, there's got to be something in there that's relatively positive, but no, not here. Not in Christine. Why? Why is the car such an issue to everyone, flat out? It just, across the board, it is a problem. Why does everyone hate the car right off the bat? Why do they have nightmares about her? What is the deal here? I don't get it. There's never an explanation, and maybe it's some kind of like demonic thing just getting into their thoughts or something, but it's unclear and it's never satisfactorily explained. Let's talk about Dennis a second, because I think the voice that King used for him created many of the issues that I've mentioned already. And honestly, combined with that and the just overly extensive buildup, if this weren't a King novel, and if I weren't doing this show, I probably would have stopped reading fairly early on. I just really could not get into this book. In fact, there's this one point a little later on, probably about 3/4 of the way through the book, where we're told that Junkins, the cops, that he felt halfway through a dark story that might prove too terrible to finish. Except he had to finish it now, didn't he? Pretty much my thoughts exactly about this book. Just, I've gone this far. I can't just stop now. I got a video I gotta produce. I got a video I gotta write. I gotta finish this book. I mean, it's like King knew. He knew this part, at least. And it gets especially frustrating whenever King just strays a wee too far into the character's parlance. Just like right here, for instance. Inside, I begged Arnie to tell this fat to bore it and stroke it, and then drive it straight up his old tan track just as fast and as far as it would go. That literally just took me 3 times to film. That's how difficult that was for me. I just kept stumbling over it, and I kept doing that while I was reading it. That shouldn't happen in any given book. You can go with the parlance, you can go with the grammar of the time, you can speak the lingo, but you shouldn't ever make it almost indecipherable. I mean, obviously I understand what this sentence is trying to say, but on first glance, not so much. And I did get used to the narration eventually. I got used to the narrator's voice, only unfortunately for it to be completely switched up, because of course, yes, Dennis gets injured about halfway through the book. He is the narrator for the first 159 pages and the last 118 pages of my edition, but right there in that middle part, after he's been injured in the football game, and I swear, I thought that Christine was going to be a part of it. I thought it felt like it was just building up to her somehow injuring Dennis, and that just never happens. I felt, again, a bit let down there. But instead of doing some type of Rear Window-esque continuation of the narrative from the hospital or from his home or from physical therapy or conversations or anything of that sort, we get this sort of impartial third-person narration for what happens to be a good chunk of the story. Why? Why does this happen? Why the switch-up? It's something that's rather unusual, though we've seen similar switch-ups in Stephen King stories before. Nothing, I think, as prominent as standout as this. And it really only happened because King found himself in a box. I got in a box, he explained. That's really the only reason. It almost killed the book. It sat on a shelf for a long time while I walked around in a sort of daze and said, this is really cute. How did you do this? It was like when you paint a room and you really do end up in a corner saying, oh heck, look what I did. There's no door at this end of the room. I had Dennis telling the story and he was supposed to tell the whole story. But then he got in a football accident and was in the hospital while things were going on that he couldn't see. Then, for a long time, I tried to narrate that second part in terms of what he was hearing, hearsay evidence, almost like depositions. But that didn't work. I tried to do it a number of different ways, and finally I said, let's cut through it. The only way to do this is to do it in the third person. I try to leave enough clues so that when the reader comes out of it, he'll feel that it's almost like Dennis pulling a Truman Capote. It's almost like a non-fiction novel. It seems a little shoddy to me, to be honest. It's very jarring, I'll put it. But I will say, this switch up does give us what happens to be some of the best content within Christine. The action scenes, which this middle section is chock full of. Wow. Moochie's death, for instance, the very first big death of the book. I mean, what can I say? At the very last moment, Moochie tried to jig left, but Christine jigged with him as if she had read his final desperate thought. The Plymouth hit him squarely, still accelerating, breaking Moochie Welch's back and knocking him spang out of his engineer's boots. Nice callback to the body there, Stephen. Well done. He was thrown 40 feet into the brick siding of the little market, again, narrowly missing a plunge through a plate glass window. The force of his strike was hard enough to cause him to rebound into the street again, leaving a splash of blood on the brick like an ink blot. A picture of it would appear the next day on the front page of the Libertyville Keystone. Christine reversed, screeched to a skidding, sliding stop, and roared forward again. Moochie lay near the curbing, trying to get up. He couldn't get up. Nothing seemed to work. All the signals were scrambled. Bright white light washed over him. "No," he whispered through a mouthful of broken teeth. "No." The car roared forward and over him. Change flew everywhere. Moochie was pulled and rolled, first one way and then the other, as Christine reversed into the street again. She stood there, engine revving and falling off to a rich idle, then revving again. She stood there as if thinking. Then she came at him again. She hit him, jumped the curve, skidded around, and then reversed again, thumping back down. She screamed forward, and back, and forward. Her headlights glared, her exhaust pipes jetted hot blue smoke. The thing in the street no longer looked like a human being. It looked like a scattered bundle of rags. Holy crap. It's just terrifying. This whole section is terrifying. And surprising, even with the extensive buildup that occurs throughout the entire novel. And every single time Christine dances with these sort of supernatural elements, whether it's just her managing to find traction on any surface or any non-surface, she gets traction on air, or seemingly phasing in and out of the 50s, or giving Dennis this ride, this New Year's ride that he will never possibly forget. Or if she's simply going out for blood, like she does here with Moochie, or later on with One Note Big Bad Buddy, who I will say there is one line there that is not as good as a really rather groan-inducing sentence. What was it? He fell backward, feet kicking grooves in the snow, his final breath slipping out in a long white jet from his slack mouth, like auto exhaust. Just come on, this is. Still good death scene though. I will say that. But every single time, whether with Moochie, with Buddy, with Don, with Darnell, who Darnell, by the way, very much a watered down version of Magliore from Roadwork, and that coupled with the kids working on the I-376 extension, very much seems like Christine could be an extension of the world established within that Bachman novel, doesn't it? And maybe in another world, maybe in a better world, it is a continuation of the Bachman books. Wouldn't that be an interesting alternate universe? That would be. But the writing at these times is just insanely good, just captivating. Darnell's death, especially. I mean, the sheer chaotic nature of a car driving into a house and just destroying the house. The choreography needed to make that make sense is on another level, and King handles it beautifully. Christine reversed across the room, floorboards groaning underneath. Her rear end struck the Sony TV and the picture tube imploded. She roared forward again and struck the side of the stairs again, shattering lath and gouging out plaster. Will could feel the entire structure grow wobbly under him. There was an awful sensation of lean. For a moment, Christine was directly beneath him. He looked down into the oily guts of her engine compartment, could feel the heat of her V8 mill. She reversed again, and Will scrambled up the stairs, heaving for air, clawing at the fat sausage of his throat, eyes bulging. Odd double use of again aside, I mean, just very well done. So, imagine, if you will, this book without all of the foreshadowing, all of the exposition that makes you wary of Christine right from the very beginning. Imagine if Christine just seemed to be a perfectly suitable, perfectly normal car that Arnie managed to almost magically repair and bring back to life from this rusted down gutter bucket that she was at the beginning. Just imagine that. And then out of nowhere, just bam, we discover she's this killing machine, this vampiric monstrosity that can just spontaneously regenerate, that can kill without leaving a trace, that can manage these unthinkable murders. Just imagine how exciting that would have been. How you would have gotten to that section with Mushi and just been like, oh my god, I can't believe that this is happening. That a car like this could do that. That a car that is, also apparently possessed by the now dead LeBay, who I couldn't help but keep picturing at this point of the story as that Ghostbusters skeleton cabbie. You know the one I'm talking about. Or is she keeping his spirit alive? Is that what's happening through? She's keeping him alive through Arnie, who's transforming into him. Is that what's going on? Maybe. I mean, even though LeBay also appears separately, he appears riding alongside Arnie. He drives Christine on his own. I mean, I guess it's got to be just a simple possession, but Arnie basically gets screws. I mean, he gets the worst of LeBay. You would think that if LeBay is not possessing him at the time, that his back would feel better, that he would think more normally. But I mean, he gets the matching back injury, he gets the memories of the 50s, he gets a love of rock and roll, and of course the obsession with Christine. I swear, I thought Arnie, at one point in this book, had sex with the car. Swear, I thought that's what King was implying. I mean, am I reading too far into quotes like this one? Put too much into her? Have you? Exactly what, Arnie? What have you put into her? I figured, and that would help explain the jealousy, the rampant jealousy that Christine has of Lee. I mean, we are told that she loves him, that Christine loves Arnie, so it didn't seem too out of the extraordinary with everything going on in this book, but no, that apparently never happened. All he did was push her and throw his back out a little bit more. I don't quite see how that's a through line of thought there, and why it was such an ugly thing. I guess he was trying to hide the fact that his car was regenerating, but I don't know. It just seemed weird. Anyway, Arnie gets all of that, and LeBay's jargon too. I mean, most notably the shitters, right? And motivate. And by the way, I love how the term shitters becomes so literal in this book, multiple times in this book. Really an overlooked detail, but kind of a funny one. I don't know if King thought that one through there, but I really appreciate this. Though the subplot about Arnie being possessed or whatever it is does go a little awry for me in terms of the signatures. Perhaps it's just my copy, perhaps it's just the printing that was used at the time, but the two signatures that come up time and time again in this book, they really don't look all that different to me. At least not enough to think one was done by one person and one done by another. I mean, maybe that last N, but come on, they're pretty much almost exactly the same. Overall, I just think there was a lot of potential left on the table with this novel. The idea that a car could be alive and killing people and be an evil being, that's really cool. And again, this was handled extremely well. Very similar cases in Salem's Lot and The Shining, where there are houses and buildings, but a car is a mobile version. That should be pretty cool. But considering the complexities of the devolution of Arnie, what was Christine, I think, and or LeBay's endgame here? Hell, what was Dennis and Lee's endgame? What was their idea here? I mean, Christine can apparently easily regenerate herself, can rebuild herself almost immediately. So what was that thought that, if we just hit her a little harder, she's gonna break, it's not gonna happen? I mean, is that it? Is it just like, we're gonna whack her until she dies because, of course, that will work? I mean, and really, stepping back, because I'm getting a little heated here, what was King, in the end, trying to convey with this novel? Because there's always some sort of grain, some sort of nugget of truth here. We've talked a lot about the meaning of it. We can see Vietnam specifically as a really prominent theme throughout the books, and the effects that war had on people at the time. Well, what's going on here? After wading through the complexities of this narrative, there simply has to be one. There has to be this core nugget of thought. But what is it? I've thought a lot about this, both while reading the novel, while watching the movie, and since while I was writing this, while I was getting ready to film this. And I think what Christine, the novel, is really about is a kid's first serious relationship, and both the effects that has on him, the people around him, most notably family and friends, and their opinions on the newly minted significant other. In this case, obviously, negative opinions all the way around. I don't think that this is a reflection of King's children at all. His oldest, Naomi, wasn't even 13 when Christine first published. But maybe, it's based on one of his old friends, or maybe based on something that one of his old friends said to him, because I really have to say that it's a pretty obvious theme when you get chapter titles like Arnie Gets Married, or you get quotes like, "Gradually I realized that I wasn't seeing as much of Arnie as I used to. Again, it was the way you seem to fall out of touch with a guy who has just gotten married." If I'm picking up on this right, and I really think that I am, I don't think it was anything but intentional. In that same 1983 interview that I mentioned, when asked about inserting more subliminal messaging into his novels, King says, "No, never subliminal. I think it should be out there where anybody can see it. I don't believe in the idea that symbolism or theme should be coded so that only college graduates can read it. The only thing that type of self-conscious literature is good for is for people to dissect it and use it to get graduate degrees or write doctoral theses. Theme and symbol are a very strong and valid part of literature, and there's no reason not to put them right out front." I like that he mentioned dissecting. That was kind of cool. And if this is the underlying theme of Christine, maybe the overlying theme of Christine, I mean, everyone in the book was right? I guess you just kind of have to chalk it up to instinct, You know danger when you see it, when you sense it, sometimes before you see it. It's that fight or flight reaction sort of takes over. And, yes, Christine sucks. She kills people. Y'all were correct in your base assumptions. Good job. Keep it up. But, I am not always correct in my base assumptions. So having learned my lesson over the years of doing this show, I did for Christine what I don't think that I have done for any other Stephen King book in the history of this show. I looked up contemporary reviews just to see how wrong or right I am when in my thoughts on this book. I wanted to say like negative thoughts, but my thoughts on this book. Here are some key phrases from Christopher Lemon Haupt's New York Times review from 1983 on Christine. "Never before has Mr. King seemed to labor so hard to get his story cranked up. Never before have Mr. King's effects seemed quite so creaky. Never has Mr. King's dialogue seemed so phony and manipulative. And yet, Mr. King eventually gets to you with his snarling, murderous monster on wheels." Words right out of my mouth. I wish that I had said it that precisely, that exquisitely. Now, King did acknowledge this more tempered reaction to the novel in his introduction to the 1990 collection 4 Past Midnight, where he wrote, "When most of the reviews of Christine suggested it was a really dreadful piece of work, I came to the reluctant decision that it probably wasn't as good as I had hoped. That, however, did not stop me from cashing the royalty checks." Really shows you where King's priorities were at the time, huh? I mean, you can't blame him, really. And it's not like John Carpenter handled the story any better for the film adaptation, but we'll talk about that next time. Until then, this has been the Drunk on Writing dissection of Stephen King's Christine, a really great in premise book that just did not live up to my expectations. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a comment below. Please share it with your friends. Please subscribe to the channel if you really enjoyed it. Head on over to drunkonriding.com where you can get more episodes more often, along with a bevy of other special goodies that I just love to share because, I don't know, I'm cool like that. I don't know. I don't know why I do it at this point. I think it's fun. Until next time when we talk the film version of Christine, and I got a lot to say about that one as well. Cheers, and keep on riding.